Welcome back.
Indeed. Welcome back. And welcome back to anyone listening to this right now, whether it's weeks or months or years after we did this. I hope you'll still find some benefit with it. Start us off, Matthew.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally unprepared
Oh,
because
please.
I didn't even think about that. I just thought James was going to go into it. I mean, I just shared on today on Facebook some of my Edinburgh show,
Yes.
which is Love is God. It's called Love is Revolting, and the
Yes.
idea that not that love is it's not like, oh, I've had a terrible breakup and
It's
I
a
hate
good play
love.
on words. It's a good play on
It's
words.
a nice play on words, which I actually stole from a comic book that I saw
Well,
years ago. There was a comic book called The Wizard of Id or something. It was about a sort of king and peasants and a wizard. And there was a bit in it where the king said, the peasants are revolting. And somebody else says, yes, I know, but we'll give them a bath or something like that.
I
And
still remember that same one. It was the guy that ran into the king and told the king, King, the peasants are revolting. And he went, You can say that again.
there you go. So it was that old pun.
Love that.
And so I thought I'd use it with love is revolting. And the idea is obviously the idea is love is having a revolution. And I think my time in the ICOC, my 15 years in the ICOC, really clarified for me, especially in retrospect, what love is and what love isn't. I watched a bit of the one we did earlier where you talked about how I hate legalism. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate legalism like we have laws in this country. You know, you can't go over 70 miles an hour. You know, it's reasonable. Don't kill anybody. You know, don't do this, don't do that. Like laws are not in and of themselves a bad thing for a society to have. I think when you're dealing with the spiritual and you're trying to achieve something that is higher than what the world, and I'm not down on the world, but just higher than society, career, job, when you're trying to achieve something higher, legalism actually, those laws don't help. I they might help initially for a little bit as a sort of framework to give you an idea, but essentially, in the end, they become manacles and shackles, and they can
Hmm.
become worse than that. They become things to beat other people over the head with. And so, for me, the idea of love being God is was a lot of it I owe to my experience in the ICOC of what I think was a very legalistic way of viewing life, God, spirituality, the Bible, Jesus. So I'm grateful again. I'm grateful again to the ICOC for that experience because I think that experience has is useful to me now because I it's like a reference of pitfalls I don't want to go down. I'm not saying I don't go down them, but it's just made me aware of many pitfalls, which I think if I wasn't aware of them with what I'm trying to do now, I'd probably fall into them. Whereas I've got that experience of like, yeah, you know where that leads. Be careful of that because you know you're starting to try to control people or put pressure on people or make people, if they just all come to this, if they all just promise to do this, whereas you know that the only way you're going to get a world of love is if each individual chooses of their own free will because it's the best way to love each other. That's the only way you're going to get true ultimate change. So
Well, it's one of the things that has always drawn me to you is your understanding of love, and that's why I loved listening to your. I'm not going to call it a speech; it was a show, but it was a beautiful blend of spirituality and humor. And I'll say one thing about the Pharisees that is a crazy thought, depending on legalism. I never thought I was a Pharisee when I was in that church. I felt bad for the Pharisees. I was a little bit perturbed by them, to be honest with you. Who do they think they are? We read that scripture about the guy that's going, Thank God I'm not like this guy praying over here. My gosh, what's his deal? We would preach that and go, That's a true Pharisee right there. Did you hear the way he did that? How judgment? We were doing that. That's why that, that was the role that we were playing in that story. But it's funny how you don't see it. You're
James, I've got to
blinded.
just I remember looking at the Pharisees. I don't think I've said this on it, and just thinking, these idiots. How can anyone? How could anyone be taken in by them? It's like, and then when I realized I was one of them, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, wow, it's so much more subtle. When we look at the Bible, you go, those disciples, they're idiots. They can't. Those religious people, look, they see, but you don't realize it's much easier when you're out of it to look at the Bible and see that
Point.
stuff.
Good
But
point.
when you're in it yourself and it's in a different cultural context and a different historical context, you don't realize how easily you can become exactly the same thing.
And I'm realizing even as I'm looking at our topic, first topic for today, this is an attempt to help us see the Phariseeism in our group and in our own hearts. So I'm hopeful it can help us shine a light with that. I've entitled this particular chapter Last Principles. And I want to give credit to somebody on Facebook. It was an ex-member who has a site that, frankly, I haven't spent time looking through, but I saw that the name of his group was Last Principles. And I've got to say, I really did like the name. I just thought this applies. And here's why. Because our original sin that we talked about was never shared or confessed, of course, I believe that trauma still haunts the souls of so many people today. I believe that. The fact that we were taught never admit to anything that could possibly affect the faith of our churches, that is distorted judgment. And for me, a cause of last principles. My first big sermon in Boston was for a teen retreat. And it was for all the teens in New England. It was a big group of people, and I preached. And I shared about a woman that I got pregnant before I ever was a Christian, and her telling me she was going to get an abortion, and what I went through as a result of that. I was a freshman in college. And I'm speaking to teens that are going away to college next year. It just seemed, let's get the truth out here. He saw me afterwards, and Kip said, never, ever do that again. What, Kip? Don't ever admit to anything like that, especially sexually, because it will come back and haunt you one day. What? I'm a Christian. I've been freed. I didn't know these things were out of bounds. I thought we could confess our sins. I thought that was the point of a preacher, to open up the hearts of others by saying, I've been there. And I learned that day that Kip felt about it very differently. He had distorted judgment because of our original sin in our group. And of course, I've already shared with you before, but I'll share this again. Speaking of this distorted judgment, remember the top leader I mentioned? One of the top leaders in the movement confessed they'd been sleeping with numerous prostitutes and over that 6-month time period. And he remained evangelist and never was even brought up to the church. And of course, he left and started another church and did the same thing there. Came back, told Kip, that's okay. We're not going to say anything. We're not going to announce it. You can stay an evangelist. And then when I asked him about it, I'll never forget it. Well, Jane, I said, why do you always give him a break? Why does he not? Why do we not come before the church like we do with everyone else? Well, James, at least he was smart enough to go to prostitutes instead of sisters in the church. Huh? What? Sounds kind of distorted to me. That's last principles. Now, I know other leaders that never messed with a prostitute, but did play around with sisters in the church. When I say play around, sexual harassment. That was dealt with pretty much the same way. Last principles. But none of them get close to this. The advice that was given to me in the final 2 weeks I had in the ministry. So I'm going to be leaving the full-time ministry. I've been in the ministry for about 10 years. I'm moving from Boston down to Atlanta. And one of the top leaders, and I'm not going to mention his name because there has been an apology. One of the top leaders in the church met with me and said, I've got a plan. I've got a plan that can get you back in the ministry. Well, I'm just out. I've only been out 2 days. What's your plan? You need to go ahead and move to Atlanta, but don't move in with Tanya. Don't move in with your 2 daughters. You need to leave them. You need to separate from them. You can still live in Atlanta, but don't live with them. And eventually, Tanya will cheat on you. I don't know how long it will be. She'll probably start dating some guys after a while. When she sleeps with one, bam, that's it. You're done. Sexual immorality, I call book, chapter, and verse. This is the reason I can get divorced. So now we're divorced. And he even added, and you come back up here to Boston, we've got a great woman for you, for your new wife. That gives me chills today, and that was years ago that advice came my way. And by the way, 2 weeks later, I didn't move out with my wife ever. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from London from a brother who said he was really bothered because he was in an all-night prayer service the night before, and one of the leaders had prayed, God, please let Tanya commit adultery so James can get back in the ministry. That happened in an all-night prayer service in London, and Tanya took the call. Tanya heard it from that brother. Like I was sitting in the other room going, who is it? Who is it? 2 weeks later, we got a call from Singapore. Same thing. Heard it in a leaders meeting. That was the new prayer of the movement, is that Tanya would commit adultery so I could divorce her and get back in the full-time ministry. Can I just say last principles and leave it at that? All of a sudden, that guy that stood up and went, thank God I'm not like that guy. That guy, that seems just kind of mundane compared to the stuff we were doing. You know something else is crazy? Is since I told that story, I've had 2 men call me up and say they received the same advice. One of them also did not take the advice and got married to the sister he wanted to marry and did not take the advice of don't do it, drop it off. I know you're engaged, but we'll find something better. We'll find somebody better for you. And he, like me, said, no, I'm happy with this. But another brother called me and said he took the advice and did leave his wife and went through the whole story with me. Horrible. And after they divorced, he got remarried, and then they divorced, and he wanted to go back to his wife, but now she's been remarried and has 2 new kids. It's just a last principles. Oh boy, here's a capper. Matthew, and of course, I'm just letting the audience know, we don't plan any of this out. We don't discuss what we're going to tell a story now that you told to me a year ago that had a profound effect on me. I see that my internet connection got unstable for a second.
So just to tell you, James, so you were saying we've not discussed anything, then it paused. It paused before as well, but what happens is the audio catches up, so you can still hear it. So it's not terrible, but I don't think you said anything in between that. I think you just said we haven't discussed any of this, and then you're about to tell a story. That's where we're
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I was on a call with a couple of guys, and Matthew, who, by the way, I've said before, I've never met personally. That's just one of the, he did hear me preach, I think, my last sermon in London. And it was called Boomerang Bible. And it was me explaining how all the things that I had taught had come back on me. That's kind of interesting because this whole session we're doing right now is called Boomerang Bible. And it's all coming back on the way we started our movement. And now the boomerang is coming back. But Matthew, I heard you tell this story, and it really affected me, and I'm going to share how. But I'd like for you to tell the story first about your prayer time, your quiet times in India.
So I got baptized around beginning of 1988, and then there was a thing called Chance of a Lifetime, which was they were sending out people. They just planted churches in Birmingham. So I was in London. They planted churches in Birmingham, Bangalore, Singapore, and Sydney, or they'd replanted. But there were 4 new sort of plantings, and they wanted people to go out either for a month or for 4 months to evangelize, to campaign. It was a staggered campaign. So I did the whole thing with my discipler. We did the 4 months, and the time in India. So I'd been a Christian. This was like June, like 4 or 5 months I'd been a Christian, and I was very emotionally unstable and very unsure of my relationship with God, full of doubt, full of fear. I used to binge on food when I didn't feel close to God. I just binge, and I, I I'd had moments where I felt really close to God, but most of the time I couldn't get close to God. I was like, where are you? I can't feel you. I can't feel you, God. And we would have these. So the campaign in India was led by Mark Templar and Mohan, and we'd meet. It was a very heavy schedule, and we'd have a devo, I think at 7 in the morning, or maybe 8. But you were expected to have had your quiet time, read your Bible, prayed, possibly had breakfast. I can't remember, before the meeting. And so we'd all be getting up at like 5:36, praying. And then when you went to the meeting, Mark would say, "Who's had an awesome quiet time?" And I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew I couldn't get close to God. I was praying. I mean, I'd go to bed at 11:30, 12. I'd have another prayer. I was like desperately trying to get close to God. It wasn't like I wasn't putting the time in, but I just couldn't connect. I wasn't feeling God's spirit. And so when he would say that, who didn't have an awesome quiet time, I would put my hand up, because I'd prayed for an hour, but it didn't feel awesome to me. It felt really like difficult. And so it would be like, well, you need to go and have your quiet time. So I would leave the meeting, everyone else would joyfully be singing, and I'd have to go off and have my quiet time. And I did this for 2 or 3 days, and it still didn't really make any difference, because I'd go and pray for another hour. I still didn't feel close to God. And in the end, I started staying in the meetings, because I realized I'm never going to have an awesome quiet time. So this is pointless. I can't get close to God. But it was a pretty miserable experience. I did feel, the biggest misery was the fact I couldn't get close to God. But obviously, that feeling of like being a useless failure. And I was the one, everyone else was fired up and close to God, and I was the one who was failing, was obviously quite a strong feeling.
The reason that story affected me so much is it instantly reminded me of a story that I had not told that involved this very leader in London, where we had a big group of people coming, because we were also always staggering evangelism, as you know. And so we had a lot of Americans, some other Europeans that were in there with us as well. At the time, maybe there were 30 or 40 people that were on staff for these months. And one of the evangelists in London said at the previous meeting, I don't think everybody's having their quiet time. And so from now on, I'm going to start the meeting out next Monday and say, did everybody get at least a 1 hour quiet time a day? And if the answer is no, you'll have to raise your hand, and I'm going to kick you out of the meeting right then. It's going to be the first thing with the meeting. We're not even going to sing a song or have a prayer first. And if you didn't have an hour quiet time every day, you will not be staying in the meeting. So does everyone understand? Yeah, we all understand. So it's a week later, we're showing up Monday. I'm driving the car with my wife to the meeting, and as we're getting ready to park, I go, I got some bad news that I'm feeling uncomfortable with. She said, what? I said, I did not have a quiet time every day this week. I didn't. I didn't come close. And my wife said, me either. Ouch. Well, what are you going to do about it, James? How are you going to handle that in this meeting? I'll probably lie. Probably lie. Last principles. Meeting started out. That evangelist said, I told you I was going to do it. I'm going to do it right now. Is there anybody in this room that did not have 7 quiet times this past week for at least an hour? One hand goes up. Mark Templer. And everybody in the room went, whoa. We thought he had the best relationship with God. This is shocking. He missed a day, and he said, I missed one day. I did have 6 awesome quiet times, but I did miss one. And that evangelist said, leave the meeting. I told you, I warned you. So he went walking out of the place, and honestly, I felt really badly. I felt guilty. So after the meeting was over, Tanya and I met with that other couple. And I said, I need to come clean on something. Time for me to confess. What? I didn't have a quiet time every day last week, and I lied about it today. And then Tanya said, I'm in the same boat. And then that evangelist's wife said, well, while we're confessing, I didn't either. And then the other evangelist said, well, I didn't either. So that makes all 4 of us. So all 4 of us, full-time leaders, not only didn't have the quiet time, but lied about it. I may have even thought as I saw Mark Temper walking out, God, thank you I'm not like that man, missing a quiet time this week. You little Pharisee. But it bothered me so much because what came to my mind was, where did Mark learn that? Where did Mark learn something as unloving, in my opinion, as get out? He learned it from me. And it bothered me so much. I thought, I've got to confess. By the way, I've been out of the church 30 years. I hear a story like that. You know what goes through my heart? I need to confess that sin. I need to repent. I need to call up Mark Templer and apologize to him and ask him to forgive me, because that was horrible. Now, I want to know something. Why do I respond that way? I'm not lifting myself up. I'm out of the church and don't claim to be a Christian now. Why is it so incumbent for me to call him up and to apologize to him and to say what I did was horribly wrong and I'm so sorry and please forgive me? Why am I willing to do that? But the dadgum leaders that are still in the church won't do that. That's what bothers me. And by the way, I want you to hear what I did to get that apology to him. Of course, he's in Nepal. I couldn't even reach him. I tried. Emails didn't go through. Text did not go through. I called up Nadine, his wife, and explained. And she said, oh, he should be at least able to get your emails. And here's his email. And he is back in Nepal. And so I tried for another 2 days, didn't get through to anything. So then I did something I never had done before. I called Nadine. She was still in the States. She was heading back the next day, back to Nepal. And I said, I've got an idea that's going to help me get my conscience clean, but only if you're okay. Reach them. And she said, I'm so sorry.
Hold on. Sorry, that you broke up there. So I've got an idea that's going to help me get my conscience clean. Go from there.
I need to confess this to Mark. And since I can't reach Mark, can I do that through you? Well, I guess. I mean, I said, Nadine, it's nothing sexual. It's nothing I would feel awkward about telling you, but it is very embarrassing. It's a sin. And I just want to confess it and apologize. And if I tell you, can you go back home and tell Mark? She said, absolutely. So I sat there on the phone with her and went through the whole story just the way I just went through it with all of you. And at the end, she said, oh my gosh, well, thank you so much for letting me know. Thank you for caring about Mark and for this apology. And I will let him know as soon as I get home. When I think of that embarrassing story, these confessions are embarrassing. It was a symbol to me of the last principles that we were so heavy into at that point in our movement, that stories like this have not even been told. And many that happened have not been apologized for. And to me, it's last principles. And that's it for our topic for today. Think about ways, if you were in the church, that some of the things you said or did that maybe have not been recounted, but reflect last principles. Things that when we look back, we're a little bit ashamed about the way it was handled. God was not at the forefront of that. Last principles.